So, Paul, thanks for joining us here on AU Manufacturing Conversations.
Appreciate the opportunity.
First question, as always, is how did you get here and what do you make?
So our company, gTET, or Green Thermal Energy Technologies, we design and manufacture industrial thermal energy efficiency equipment, in particular organic Rankine cycle power generators and high temperature heat pump solutions for industry. In our background, we established the business, it's a privately owned business, myself and business partner. We established the business end of 2010, and we actually come out long-time automotive guys prior to establishing gTET, working in thermal products in the automotive industry around the world before we actually established gTET.
What was your last job before you started the company?
So I was general manager for and director for automotive supply company, a company called Air International. Established their technical centre in Shanghai 2006 to 2009 and managed their Australian business from 2009 till we established gTET in end of 2010.
And did you start with organic Rankine cycle generators?
Yeah, so the business, we actually started under a CRC at that point, not IMCRC, but back in I think 2008 as a
Advanced
potential
manufacturing CRC?
It was actually an automotive one. It was looking at an application within the automotive industry for ORC, and it was actually under an automotive company, our automotive company at that stage. And well, cut a long story short, we spun it out as a separate business as gTET at the end of 2010. So in an industrial application as opposed to the automotive one.
Right, and so speaking of industrial applications, what are some places that your products are used in?
So the ORC generators, a range of industries, everything from companies like Veolia in incineration through to timber industry with biomass boilers, geothermal with projects. The heat pumps, the high temperature heat pumps, the big focus for us at the moment is in the food and beverage, so dairies, distilleries, breweries, anywhere that we can get them off gas boilers up to 120 degrees hot water that we can produce with our heat pumps. In development, which is part we'll talk about in a minute, part of the IMCRC project, heat pump development up to over 150 degree hot water, which we'll commercialise in the next 18 months. Target market for that is to replace low pressure gas boilers in industry off fossil fuel gas boilers. And of course the way gas prices are going, it's major focus for industry now is to get away from gas.
Sure. So tell me about the IMCRC project. When did that begin and what was the, origin of it?
So the IMCRC project for us began in end of 2019, just before COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And the focus was about, for our heat pumps, was about the drive system for the compressor, our turbo compressors. We're already doing the turbines locally, and we're for our expander for the ORC, and we're using the same technology to build a compressor for the heat pumps. And so with RMI2, we've developed a special high-speed drive for the permanent magnet motor in the turbo compressor. So the project was two parts. One was this drive, and the other part was a magnetizer, demagnetizer for the permanent magnet rotor used in the motor, so that we can actually locally, as part of the local manufacturing process, we can magnetise the rotors after we've assembled them, and demagnetise when we have to do maintenance on them.
Right, and so the ability to do so locally is limited or non-existent?
Yeah, so we're I think probably the only company in Australia that is designing and producing high-speed turbo machinery. I mean, the technology is effectively aerospace technology. Our turbines, for example, spin at 45,000 RPM and use a gas bearing. So it's the bearing technology is quite common in aerospace, but not aware of anybody in Australia using them. And so we actually lunch off consultants, long-time colleagues we've got in North America there, the aerospace industry, that have sort of trained us through the use of these four bearings and the turbine technology, so for us to be able to localise.
So heat pumps are something I've been a little curious about. Seen some comments made by Beyond Zero Emissions and others that Australia's adoption is slow compared to Europe and elsewhere, and there's a lot of unrealised potential from taking them up in places like low temperature process heat. What's your observation of Australian industry, heat pumps, and what can be done to make use of them?
Yeah, so certainly that's true. It's the adoption in Australia has been quite slow, and I think industry being somewhat unfamiliar with them, and of course gas till now has been relatively cheap. Groups like A2EP, the Australian Energy Productivity, Australian Alliance for Energy Productivity, which we're members of as well, has been a major advocate for high temperature heat pumps and has been a big supporter of us in terms of the deployment of those across industry. There's certainly an educational element to it, to industry, and we're finding that the deployment, going into a plant, looking at the opportunity and how it's best optimised within their plant, is quite a complex process, because of course most of the opportunities that we find are existing facilities, been running a process for decades, trying to dovetail into an existing process. You can't afford the downtime. You've got to work out what's the optimal solution in terms of cutting into their existing process without affecting it. And so that's been not just an educational process in heat pumps, but also a process of going through and looking at what's the best way of installing it in terms of their existing facility, which is not necessarily always the most energy efficient, or the optimal solution for a client that's got an existing process may not be the most energy efficient, but it's the least disruptive to their process, because they can't afford to have downtime, of course.
We're curious about biomass, and again, a thing that Australia is lagging the world in the adoption of, and something that you're involved in through the generator you just mentioned. Tell me about what you're noticing, and if you see it as an area of unrealised potential.
Yes, I think biomass, so whether it becomes realising it in terms of an energy source, there's a lot of issues around how do you best use it. So, for example, we worked in timber industry. We've done a system for a company that takes the waste from wineries and processes that through a biomass boiler. But if you've got to transport it, then the cost of the transport for that biomass doesn't make sense. If you've got a waste source that you can utilise that's at the point of power generation, then absolutely it makes sense. It's a very robust process. The biomass boilers, there's a range of processing for biomass, everything from biomass boilers to pyrolysis. There's a range of technologies there to do it, but certainly biomass boilers have been around for decades, so the processes are robust. But of course, depending on the type of biomass you're using will depend on how it and the calorific values and all the rest of it of the fuel will depend on how you can burn it and the types of technology used in the biomass boiler. So there's a lot of factors in it, and whether it makes sense for your process. You've got to store the biomass. So a lot of factors. It doesn't make sense to store lots of biomass. So really, there's a lot of factors to take into account when you're making the call.
I'd like to know your definition of innovation. We're talking about an innovative manufacturing CRC event, and innovation is obviously an enduring theme throughout the occasion. What's your personal definition?
I think for us, innovation is looking at a problem or solution to a problem from a different paradigm, coming up with a solution around things that are not necessarily done the same as they've been done previously. So for us, we pride ourselves on coming up with innovative solutions for clients in industry, and that innovation is not necessarily just the technology. It may be as I was talking about before, maybe the actual solution about how we cut into their process and deal with their process. So for us, innovation is around doing something different or coming up with ideas that are not necessarily the same as what the company's been doing previously.
So a different idea, but intelligently integrated as well.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
And lastly, I'd like to ask your point of view on why Australia needs a strong manufacturing ecosystem.
Well, I think it's critical that we've got sovereign capabilities in particular technologies. I think the dependency, which I think we've put into overseas countries and global sourcing over the years, has meant that we've lost a lot of sovereign capability. And I think in terms of our ability to support our own capabilities and our own economic development, we can't be dependent on other countries. That we need to have some level of, and that depends on the commodity and our definition as a country about what we think is actually important to sustaining things like energy. Of course, we're finding now is absolutely critical to the wealth and the value of the country. So sovereign capability in things that are critical to the country, I think, is absolutely critical. I mentioned before, we come out of the automotive industry, and there's things that are, we've allowed the automotive industry to dissipate in Australia, and there's certainly in the engineering side that I come from, there's very few industries that give you the ability to gain experience and knowledge from conceptualisation through to commercialisation. And we're very strong in Australia in certain aspects, whether it be the conceptualisation through research institutes and what have you, and maybe the commercialisation, but very few other industries give you that full breadth that the automotive industry has given us. And so I think we sort of, unfortunately, tended to lose that capability somewhat as the automotive industry's decline in Australia. And hopefully we can sort of gain that skill back with some of these sort of programs like the IMCRC is bringing forward.
Sure. I think as much as anyone else, I appreciate the value of an automotive sector and what it brings in terms of training and of having an ecosystem of engineering talent and commercialization prowess and management practices that it fosters.
Yeah.
And to lose that is a terrible thing. But at the same time, on the flip side, I also see a lot of startups nowadays who have ex-Holland, ex-Ford, ex-Toyota staffers,
Yep.
and they say they're wonderful to have and they're an asset to whatever the new company is.
Yep, and so we're diversifying that experience into other industries, which is really a good thing, yeah.
Indeed. Okay, Paul, well,
Nice.
that's everything I wanted to ask you, so thank you very much for being with us on AU Manufacturing Conversations.
Perfect, thank you.